Hello, and welcome to Theology Thursday, where I do a video about a biblical or theological subject. I was raised in a Christian home. Both my parents had me in church 9 months before I was born. I was raised going to Sunday school. I was in those days called Baptist Training Union. I was in part of an organization called RAs, Children's Choir. Memorized lots of Bible verses, went to vacation Bible school, learned lots of Bible stories. And then when I was 21 years of age, God called me in a ministry. So I went to college where I got a degree in history. I started with physics, but that really didn't seem like it would apply well to a pastor, so I switched to history because of the research skills that I knew I'd be using over the years. And I took a lot of Bible classes just as electives because I knew I was going to ministry. Then I went to seminary, which is a graduate school for pastors, and earned my Master's of Divinity, and then went on and did a PhD in Old Testament and Hebrew. I am currently, in addition to being the pastor here at First Baptist, also a professor at Gateway Seminary, where I teach Hebrew and Old Testament, plus I teach preaching. I can read Hebrew, which is what the Old Testament was written in. I can do some Greek, not as good as my Hebrew skills, but Greek, which is what the New Testament was written in. I know lots of big theology words. I can actually spell antinomianism and Sabellianism and Apollinarianism and explain and define what those mean. And people wondering, why are you giving us your credentials? Well, here's the reason. When it comes to people on our planet, I know the Bible about as well as anyone else. I know theology pretty well. I can read the Bible in the original languages. I know the history. I know a lot about archaeology. I can rattle off the kings of Assyria, and I can tell you what happened to Moab, and I can tell you about some of those kings. I mean, tell you that one of my heroes in the Bible, Esther, that's not her actual name. Hadassah was her name, but they called her Esther. There's only one verse that says that. And so I know the Bible pretty well. What that means is that when people ask me biblical or theological questions, I can give them an answer. And I do it with some regularity. Sunday before after church, or I might get an email or a phone call, or maybe on a Wednesday night after church, someone says, "Hey, I've got a question. I was reading this, and what do you think about this?" That sort of thing. And so I get lots of Bible questions, and part of my responsibility as a pastor and a professor is to be able to answer those questions. Now, I say that because there is one question that oftentimes is too elusive to produce an answer. It's the question that I probably get maybe the most as a pastor over the years. People may not word it as directly as I'm going to, but the undercurrent of their questions is still the same. And that is this question: why did this happen? So with all of my years of education, decades spent studying the Bible, understanding theology, all the books, I've read thousands of books on archaeology and the geography of the Holy Land. I've led trips to Israel. I mean, all that kind of stuff. With all of that, the reality is I can't answer that question oftentimes. So I want to attempt to help us today with the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Why did God let this happen? So I want to give some answers, and then I want to give some hope. So let's talk about some answers. Sometimes there is a reason that we can know why bad things happen to good people. Probably the classic case in the Old Testament would be Joseph. Joseph was sold by his brothers into slavery in Egypt, worked his way up in the household of Potiphar. Then Potiphar's wife made a false accusation, found himself again as a slave in prison this time, was there for a few years through a whole lot of events. And you can go back and read this story. It takes several chapters. He ends up as the second most powerful man in Egypt. There's a famine. His brothers come. He recognizes them. They don't recognize him. And through a series of events, he ends up revealing himself and bringing his family to be in Egypt. When his father dies, the brothers get very, very concerned because they think Joseph is going to take vengeance on us now. And so this is what we read. And when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "Well, maybe that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message that said, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. So Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Now, we don't know if Jacob ever actually said this or not. But anyway, this is the statement the brothers that make. And so his brothers came to him, and they fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for I am in the place of God. Now watch this. Genesis 50, verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I'll provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So Joseph endured a lot of bad things, but God brought those into his life to put him into a position to do lots of good for lots of people. So sometimes we see bad things happening, and years later we realize that God did that because it was beneficial to others. The most important example of this, of course, would be when an innocent man is falsely accused on trumped-up charges in a sham trial and then executed just a few hours later. And, of course, that would be Jesus on the cross. What happened to him, he obviously did not deserve. But it happened. And, of course, it happened for our good, because without the death of Jesus, we can never be forgiven. So sometimes we see that bad things happen to people, and God uses that to bring about the good for many others like Joseph. And of course, ultimately, we see that in the life of Jesus. Sometimes bad things happen to good people because they're good, because they're wanting to live for the Lord. So, for example, the Apostle Paul finds himself beaten and run out of town and thrown into prison, all because he's being faithful to the Lord. Like, we know why these bad things happened to him. He didn't deserve them, but we know that it's a part of this spiritual war that you and I face. And so sometimes bad things happen to us because we're good, because we are living for the Lord, because of our commitment to Jesus Christ. Jesus said, in this world you will be persecuted. So sometimes we see that happen as well, that bad things happen to people because of their faithfulness to the Lord. Sometimes we see bad things happen to people, or to good people, because we realize that there's a priority in life. So Psalm 73 puts it this way. Man, truly God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, man, my feet had almost stumbled and my steps nearly slipped. Like, man, I'm struggling. For I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. It seemed like their life was good and my life was bad. However, perspective changes that. So later in the psalm, he says this, but when I thought how to understand this, it seemed to me a wearisome task, like I couldn't find the answer until I went into the sanctuary of God. Then I discerned their end. In other words, sometimes good and bad happen to people because of their perspective. Maybe it's really not that bad. It's a sacrifice that we have made because we believe that eternal things are of greater value. And there are other people that sacrifice eternity for the present. So even though it seems like maybe their life is better than our life, and their wickedness has helped them advance in this world, and we feel like we're struggling, the reality is that's all they've got. Whereas you and I have something of eternal value. And so, yep, some bad things happen because of sacrifices that we make, because we recognize that we have some higher priorities in life. And so, that's just a part, and that should not bother us. My wife and I have always given 10% of our income to God. It's called tithing. It's been a financial sacrifice over the years. There were other sacrifices that we have made when perhaps I could have done something to make more money, or to have an easier life, or something that's less stressful than being a pastor, or whatever it is. But it's okay. We don't mind making those sacrifices. We don't mind the bad stuff that happens when it seems like the wicked are only having good things happen, because we are looking at it from an eternal perspective, not just in this life perspective. So those are all, we can understand those. Okay, yeah, I got that. Especially sometimes we look back on life and we see some bad things that happen, but God used them for good. But the real challenge comes when bad things happen that we don't ever see any apparent good purpose come from. And the classic example of this in the Bible, of course, would be the book of Job. Job suffers tremendously. He suffers, he loses his children, He loses his health. He loses his wealth. Even his wife says, man, why don't you just curse God and die? I mean, even his marriage is on the rocks, so to speak. So what's the key to the book of Job? Well, man, there are all kinds of theories as to the purpose of the book of Job, and I don't want to cover all that today. But when you read Job 38 to 41, those 4 chapters are called the Yahweh speeches. That's because God speaks to Job from a whirlwind, from a tornado. And essentially what God says is, I'm huge. I make the sun rise and the sun set. I tell the ocean as far as it can go. I make it rain, or I withhold rain, or I send the snow. I'm the one that makes the animals do what they do. I'm the one that brings about the seasons, the winter, the spring, the summer. God says, I'm in control of everything. So basically, God says, Job, I am in charge. But he never gives Job an answer as to why he suffered all the bad things that he did. Job just never gets an answer. But God says, hey, I'm in charge. Nothing has happened to you beyond my control. So that's why I want to transition now into hope. So we have some answers, sometimes because of our sacrifice, or sometimes because we're living for the Lord and get persecuted for that. And sometimes God does bad things because it's going to be good for a multitude of people, like with Joseph or the death of Jesus. But oftentimes, it's when we face situations like Job. And one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss this today is a couple weeks ago, I got a call from one of my best friends. For the last few years, his wife has had cancer. They've been treating it. Things seem to be going pretty well. And she'd been taken to the hospital, and they had done some scans, and the cancer has spread over much of her body. And my friend Randy asked me, he said, I don't understand why. And I had no answer. I don't understand why. With all of my degrees and all of my education and all of my experience and study and research, I don't have an answer. I don't. I cannot answer the question why. But there are words of hope in the Bible. Number one, cancer is never more powerful than God. Nothing happens outside the control of God. God is not in heaven wringing his hands saying, I wish I could do something about this, but I cannot. So though we may not know it, God has a purpose. We may not understand it, but God knows what he's doing. And he has the power to do what he wants to. And what he does for his own glory, even when we don't fully comprehend. I think when we get to heaven, we will. The Bible says now we kind of see through a glass darkly, like we don't really understand, but then face to face. And so it's good to know that nothing ever happens outside the control of God. We're also promised the abiding presence of God. Matter of fact, this is one of the dominant themes of the Bible. You'll be my people, I'll be your God, and I will dwell with you. Jesus, in his last words before he left earth, said, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of this age. Jesus told us to go prepare a place for us, and will come to get us, so that where he is, we can be also. The presence of God is just an overwhelming, overarching theme of Scripture. And so no matter how dark the valley we're going through, no matter how long the road is, no matter rough and bumpy it is, we never travel it alone. God's in charge, and God is always with us. And then, maybe the most important word of hope is, you and I do not have the strength to handle many of the bad things that come into our lives. We just don't. We're weak. And so, the good news is that God strengthens us. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read it. I could just quote it for you, but I want to read it because I want you to hear it. It's found in Isaiah chapter 41. It's one of my favorite verses in all the Bible. And I think it really is a word of hope when bad things are happening to good people. God says, fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. So yes, sometimes when bad things happen, we can look back later and see why they happened. But most of the time we ask this same question, why did God let this happen? Why did this happen? Why do so many bad things happen to good people that seem to have no reason or purpose? It's a question that I'm sorry I cannot answer. I wish that I could. I know a lot of these Theology Thursdays, I answer questions that people may have about the Bible, but this one I can't always answer. But I can say this, nothing happens outside the sovereign control of God. God is always with us, and God will strengthen us. He will help us. He will uphold us with his righteous right hand. So when bad things happen, have an eternal perspective. Remember the presence of God, the power of God, and most of all, lean heavy on the strength of God to carry you and to bear you through. Because in the end, Psalm 73 is right. Even when I'm envious of the prosperity of the wicked, truly God is good to Israel, to those who have a pure heart. In the end, ultimately, what God does, he does for his glory, which is our good, because his glory is our good. So I hope this helps you. I know in some ways it won't, because I can't answer the question that maybe you've had about things that happen in your life, but I hope it gives you some help and some encouragement when bad things happen to good people. Go to the sanctuary and remember the end. Keep an eternal perspective that God's in control, God is always with us, and God will give us the strength to get it through. So God bless you, and I hope this helps you in the days to come.